Hello, my name is Tim Downs. Good afternoon. I am with Smart Gig Media. Our company produces business conferences and workshops and webinars such as this on the subject of broadband connectivity for economic development's sake for municipalities and communities throughout the country. Today I'm happy to moderate this session called Practically Broadband, Leveraging Funds and Building Networks to Increase Access and Adoption. What we're here to discuss is how counties can gain access to broadband networks even if traditional service providers and incumbents aren't building in their area or upgrading their communities with the infrastructure that will drive economic development and commerce in the next 10 to 20 years. Our speakers today include Brian Mefford. Brian is the CEO and founder of Connected Nation Exchange. Connected Nation Exchange is a partner in the Kentucky Wired project, which is a statewide initiative to bring broadband connectivity to many of the unserved and underserved areas throughout the state of Kentucky. Joining Brian is Steve Peloso. He's the Vice President of Landmark Dividend. Landmark Dividend is one of the nation's largest and most successful ground lease acquisition companies. His company provides value, capital, and liquidity to property owners, including cities and municipalities who are seeking to build fiber optic networks, fund cell towers, and other infrastructure projects. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Brian Mefford, who will do the first half of the presentation. Brian, please take it away.
Tim, thank you, and thank you to CSAC and the members who have joined for the webinar today. It's a pleasure to be with each of you. Appreciate your time. I'll spend the next 10 to 15 minutes. I have only 5 slides here, and we'll kind of power through this content and then flip over to some visuals and some a platform that we use to organize our client communities. Tim mentioned our participation in the support of the Kentucky Wired project. We'll use that as something of a case study to then talk about how counties in Kentucky, across Kentucky, are finding their way to sustainable broadband solutions. My organization and the previous organization I founded, Connected Nation, has been at work in this space for the past 15 years or so, and we've worked with hundreds, literally hundreds of communities across the country, from literally the poorest rural counties in the country to some of the largest metropolitan areas. So as a frame of reference, before we get into the specific case studies, I just want to take a couple minutes, few minutes, and share with you just sort of the top 5 insights that we've gleaned over time relative to where we are today in the broadband space. And the first key point that is obvious but somewhat different from where we've been in the past is that broadband infrastructure is the connective tissue for smart cities and counties that we have to ensure is abundant. And so the key words underlined there are smart cities, smart counties, concept that all of you are familiar with. But that dynamic and the need for counties to roll out smart county services and applications has now changed the dynamic, because now it's not just a matter of ensuring, as a county leader, ensuring adequate connectivity for your citizenry. It's about ensuring abundant connectivity that can support this array of products and services and applications. So quickly, just moving through these insights, and some of these, perhaps all of them will be obvious to you, but also somewhat nuanced from our perspective. So first, plan your work and work your plan. Yes, stating the obvious, but the details there matter. We encourage our clients who are cities and counties in the U.S. primarily to not only do that from their own perspective, but to invite private sector participation in a master planning exercise. So ask the private sector also to contribute to a 5-year master plan where they plan to provide services, what type of services. You do the same from the county's perspective, and it allows you to identify your needs in, relative to their limitations, and then that sort of equips you to then own that gap. Next, organize and visualize your connectivity so that everybody in your county is on the same page. And so we encourage county clients to do that, to see and visualize their current connected services and their infrastructure. So again, not just what they're providing, but also what the private sector is providing. And we include infrastructure there because you have connected infrastructure that is, has significance as you build out plans for how to increase connectivity and broadband in your community. Lots of communities across the country have, smart switching systems for their traffic switching, traffic light systems. That's pertinent to this discussion in a big way. Visualize your relevant planned projects. Where are water and sewer projects planned that provide open trenches for conduit or fiber itself? And again, the important part is to include both public and private data, and you're gathering that from the first step in that 5-year master plan. Insight number 3 of 5, view everything that is connected or enables connectivity as a system to be managed, as you would imagine, systematically. So view everything that is connected or enables connectivity as a system so that you can manage it systematically. And what we mean by that is that in taking that view, instead of having a disparate and segmented view of pieces of the puzzle, whether it be viewing fiber or open conduit one way, a utility pole, managing and viewing that separate, a building rooftop, managing and viewing that separate, county land, raw land, whether that's parks or rights of way, viewing that separately and distinct. We need to view all of these things together so that we can manage these things centrally and in a more streamlined and efficient way. We're able to manage those. We just see it regularly that, like everything else, but even more dramatically in this respect, departmental silos tend to kill good opportunities to expand connectivity. And so I asked the question there, what is planning and zoning approving or denying today that would have an impact on your connectivity going forward and on your strategic connectivity plan? Insight number 4 of 5, use what you have today, your assets particularly, to get more of what you need, connectivity. And so this calls us to think differently about what our assets are in this context. There are plenty of communities across the country that have built out fiber or use and manage fiber for their own sake, for the county's use. You can do fiber swaps. You can invite providers in to use the dark fiber that you have available. But allowing them to access that puts you in a different position from a negotiating standpoint. And you see the list here, but using your buildings and rooftops, the access rights to those locations, that's important for providers. And so sort of using that to gain ground in negotiations or just in working as partners through that 5-year master plan. If a building rooftop in a particular area is important to a provider, you may have a broadband need, a connectivity need that's nearby that becomes part of that trade-off equation. Utility poles, traffic poles are a key asset. Your public rights of way and how you're able to leverage access to your public rights of way is very significant here. With the not the advent, but the expansion and acceleration of small cell infrastructure. That's causing lots of activity to occur, lots of interest in public rights of way, both from a fiber standpoint as well as a wireless infrastructure standpoint. You can use that interest to help support accomplishing the county's goals. And also services purchased, as we'll talk about in the Kentucky case study, by consolidating connectivity services that you're purchasing, that can be, those can become big dollar figures that can turn into leverage for helping you achieve greater connectivity. Last point here is encouraging to leverage public-private partnership. Stephen is going to talk at length about this, so I'll save the details for him to cover. But what I want to now pivot into is a discussion, an illustration of the Kentucky Wire project and how this has enabled us, my company, CNX, to partner with Macquarie in the P3 model that they are mostly focused at a state level, but Stephen will discuss how, and I will too, how this translates into county level opportunities. What I want to illustrate first, this is an illustration, and I'm in our company's platform, and we make this available to the counties and cities with which we consult. I've gone through some click-throughs here of, this is the city of Columbus. And to illustrate the point about visualizing your assets, I wanted just to quickly be able to show you, how we're able to visualize for the city the fiber that they own. The dark green here is land that they own, and of course, we have the data behind all of these key data points. We have water towers. And you'll note that the fiber is even different colors. So this is characterized different ways with ownership information or management information. And things like utility poles are certainly able to be added. And so then this allows us to then manage these assets in a way that's strategic for the city. And so as a carrier is evaluating a particular area for build out, Columbus and our other clients are able to have a very intelligent and informed discussion about the assets that the public sector can bring to bear that can reduce the deployment costs or the build out costs for the private company, and thereby gain the public sector leverage to encourage additional build out. So that's a Columbus, Ohio example. Let me talk just briefly here about the Kentucky example. And so this is specifically the Kentucky Wired example, and I want to drill down to Warren County. I'll do that in just a moment. What I want to just help you visualize first is kind of the genesis for this project. And really the state took an approach to say it's middle mile and transport backhaul fiber that's a primary barrier to local broadband expansion, because what the state was able to see is that long haul fiber carriers, they're just relative to other states. In Kentucky just has few options, certainly from a statewide standpoint. So that was established early on, and the state wanted to be able to leverage the buying power, the current buying power of consolidated spend across the state to invest in this network. So basically, the state is taking the current spend that the state has on connectivity services, and as this statewide network is built out, then we'll transfer that current spend to pay for pay for the network. So you have that kind of opportunity at the local level as well, and I'll drill down here in a moment and show you how a particular county is taking advantage of that. But first, this is what the statewide view looks like, and so this is again primarily a middle mile network, 3,200 miles of fiber across the state, but it enables connectivity at specific points in every county. So Kentucky has 120 counties. Every county, and the one we'll focus on here is Warren County in the southwestern part of the state. Warren County has a couple dozen endpoints. So those endpoints are state facilities that are being connected to this new statewide service. What that means for this county, and again, each endpoint is delineated. So you've got community colleges. You see that over here, South Central Kentucky Community Technical System. Here's K through 12. It's the district office for the schools, the health services, Commonwealth Health Services, and you get the picture of how these pieces come together. At the local level, then, the county then asks, and you don't. This scenario doesn't require that state investment in the middle mile. You can go through the same process that we'll walk through here. But in Kentucky, if a county went through this process, their choices for connecting to the internet, the big internet, so the transport costs, the backhaul costs, have been fairly exorbitant over time, and so the business case for a local solution has been difficult to justify absent this state provided middle mile network. So at the local level here in Warren County, county leaders wanted to bring all this data together and first ask those questions of what is our what does our existing service look like, and so this is the local cable provider, and roughly this is the county boundary here, and so like you experience, most counties in the country experience, there's decent coverage in the middle of the county, poor to abysmal coverage in the outer reaches of the county, and also some gaps within even the central piece. And so, and then here's the DSL coverage. Again, I think this is going to look, this looks pretty similar in counties across the country. But then what this county said is, they said, well, we want to focus on, not just the 25 megabit definition from the FCC. We want to focus on 100 megabit kind of service and even gigabit service. But here is, so you see now at that level we're solving a different equation, and basically the county said, well, we want to solve that. We want to build out everywhere. So here's the middle mile infrastructure that we're going to leverage. They said, let's look at what our commercial alternatives are for middle mile. And you can see again, there's not a lot a lot of that infrastructure throughout this county. So then the county said, what are our existing assets that are more public sided that we can leverage? And so let's see, where are we? In this particular county, there is a municipal utility as well as a rural co-op. And so working with the municipal utility, we mapped out their fiber coverage. And as you'd imagine, it's largely in the city center, but does go out in some parts of the county. And then with the rural co-op, we did the same, and so we looked at their fiber path. And so now the question then becomes, what is it that we want to accomplish exactly? Who do we want to connect first? and what's it going to take to get there? What's it take to build that out? And so one of the pieces that we add to the equation is the community anchor institutions. So I'll just go ahead and check all of these. And so for this county, whether it's schools or community college, university, libraries, et cetera, at a minimum, the county is saying these are the places we want to reach first. So we want to see a range of options from just serving our public institutions all the way to a fiber to the home kind of big bite at the apple. So what that then allowed us to do is, from an engineering standpoint, account for what is existing in terms of the partners that are willing to make their assets available. Where are the institutions that we want to connect, and then what else is left to build? And visually, this is what that begins to look like. And so that leads us to, a very specific business case and cost analysis for what's required to build out that kind of service countywide. And it empowers, and it gives them a range. So from connecting institutions primarily all the way to the other end of the spectrum of connecting every home, it provides that range of options and cost scenarios. And then working with a financing partner, and this is where I'll begin to turn it over to Stephen. The county, with the county as our client, we provide financing options that go beyond just sort of the usual sources to more creative public-private transaction and through private financing, which gives this particular community very attractive options for financing a project of this magnitude over a longer period of time. And so with that, I think that's the point to segue over to Stephen, and we'll look forward to building any questions or thoughts you have at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. This is Steve Peloso, excuse me, with Landmark Dividend. Appreciate today having the opportunity to speak to you. So thanks for your time this afternoon. So and Brian, for your segue into what we're going to talk about now, which is how do you pay for this stuff, which tends to be a question often asked. You'll see here it says municipal broadband, but effectively municipal and county will be interchangeable for this presentation. And in fact, this presentation that you're seeing was just delivered about 2 weeks ago at the Smart Gig Columbus conference in Ohio, along with Brian and other folks that are looking to bring broadband solutions to bear, and from our perspective, funding solutions to support broadband. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. We've got about 18 minutes, I think, or so to get to the nut of this, which is some models that are alternatives, creative alternatives that most cities and counties aren't thinking about when it comes to, how do we fund these things. But there's no doubt that broadband is the fourth utility, and as a utility, the options for having it are no longer, well, they're no longer options, frankly. And there are certainly economic, educational, business, and other elements of growth that are impacted by the inability to get access to high-speed internet, high-speed fiber, and all the things that they can bring to bear. And as we move on in time, and although we hear about IoT, so the Internet of Things, services that will emanate from that on many different fronts, all the way out to connected vehicles, which is not that distant anymore, or elements of public safety and quality of life issues, broadband, it will be a necessity, and it ought to be a service that's delivered on a regular, quantifiable, consistent basis, throughout every county in the United States. So we're going to be focusing on a couple of things today. that so public agencies are starting to take a look at when they think about, frankly, building their own networks. Typically, from a public perspective, the first consideration is how much and what kind of additional services can we bring to bear, and how do we reduce cost, how do we save money. More and more of these discussions are starting to include how can we create revenue, can we create revenue. One of the dynamics that's taking place out there was kind of the rolling back of the carriers and the bigger service providers when it comes to integrating infrastructure is the opportunity potentially for government agencies to build fiber that third parties like the carriers, local and otherwise, can then ride on at a cost, and these then maybe become revenue opportunities. There's certainly other things like smart initiatives, whether it's traffic control, smart lighting, a whole assortment of initiatives that are here now, frankly. Typically you'll see them in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, but they certainly would apply to county infrastructure as well, because they bring service and control, they save money, and they offer systemic control, as Brian's referred to, in his presentation, the ability to look at all of it, manage it, understand it, and monitor it, holistically from a single point or something thereabouts. So buy versus build. This was touched on just prior. So most public entities, they have the option to self-fund, or there are public-private partnerships like the Macquarie relationship with the state of Kentucky. And there are hybrids, certainly, that take into account third-party providers that can help counties or municipalities run, operate, and maintain networks, provide content, do the things that public entities don't want to do and maybe shouldn't be in the business of, which is running networks. It's one thing to provide the pipe. It's another thing to provide content and control and customer service and a lot of other aspects. So depending on where you are, and there's a lot of different stories out there in that mix, it's really on a case-by-case basis what model fits the best. These are complex issues, frankly. The P3 prospects or the hybrids are certainly a discussion in and of themselves. Happy to talk to anybody after the fact about it, but there's a lot of variations, and I'm not going to spend any time here. But what I'm moving, what we call the capital stack, effectively, where a municipality or an agency, a county has decided they're going to build their own network. Then how do you pay for it? And what tools do you have? And into that conversation always comes the politics that's surrounded, which can be, frankly, more impacting than the access to financial capacity that's required in order to deliver. So typically, again, from a muni perspective, you can see by the slide there's obligation bonds, revenue bonds, general funds, grants, which are typically, well, there's no guarantee with a grant, so a little challenging to plan, but certainly available. And then third-party debt. So those third-party debt opportunities typically come through banks. And there are other financial tools out there, providers, and maybe the P3 model can fit inside that, although that would likely be more of an equity position within the capital stack. But so, and these all depend, again, on a region-to-region, very local basis as to what's acceptable and what's not, by law, what's available, what's not, so they can vary by a great degree. But so where does Landmark fit in, and what do we do? So Landmark provides capital in three ways, and I'll talk more about it. But for development, we provide capital from a capitalization aspect of existing assets in order to bring money to bear, so freeing up cash that's already embedded in real property assets within a municipality, and then monetizing existing revenue streams, so longer-term revenue streams, which I'll talk about, that many, many cities have available to them. They're part of the day-to-day operation, the revenue exchange, but there's rarely are they used to bring money up front, lump sum to bear, to satisfy a need, to support a project, for instance. So we can fill a gap in the capital stack. So if you look at the typical options, all of those combined, at least from the public perspective, grants, funds, bonds, they may not get the project off the ground. Maybe it's 80% of what's necessary, and then we can provide to that 20%. Or where time is an issue, the ability to turn around capital very quickly based on the fact that all these projects are typically phased over long periods of time, and different aspects of it can be brought to bear sooner than others. There's an opportunity. From a capital provisioning perspective, is provide these funds through an operating lease. The good news about that is leasing or providing capital through an operating lease that capital would typically not be treated as debt. So where there's a need to avoid debt or the inability to take on additional debt, but capital is required, it's another tool in order to bring money to bear. Or again, maybe where bonds are not available, or there's a politically, it's not an opportunity in a particular part of the year, cycle of the year. So those are some of the things that we see when we talk to folks about why this is a funding tool. The capital that we provide in exchange for an operating lease is always in exchange for real property interest. So what does that mean? It means that we're looking to have, it requires an easement. Fee can be an option if in some cases the municipality or the county wouldn't mind having something off the books. If having us hold title is right and appropriate, it's beneficial to both parties, that it's certainly something that we would consider. And we have seen licensing options, and they vary depending on what's available city to city in terms of city covenants and the law. Where rights of way are involved, sometimes fee or easement is not available, but license is, so it tends to just be a tool that allows it to take place. Because we're not a lender, we don't have the typical covenants, and some of those covenants can be fairly onerous. So it's always a triple net situation. So we are not an operator or a manager or maintainer of networks. We don't provide content. We're simply providing capital. So we're a very passive participant to the development and to the operation. And we don't participate in the development, the ownership. We provide capital. So where other entities, say for instance the P3 or some of the hybrids, that these events include active participation and operation, or a requirement to provide certain elements, fiber to the home or other things that create revenue streams. That's not our business. So that for some people, that passive opportunity is important to them. Payback terms can run the gamut from 10 years to, I've got 25 to 40, could be much longer. We typically look at the thinking about the shelf life of fiber, typically warranted for 25 years. There's absolutely evidence of 40 and 50 and 60 years, even in undersea cable. So the technology is very robust. Things don't change very much, but term is something that we provide as a tool. Because from a lease perspective, as a monthly lease element, the longer the term, the smaller the payment, and that may well be a very good fit as people are going through their budgeting exercises. When we fund for development of broadband, because we're taking a real property interest in it, we're able to include veritably everything in the passive network. So what is that? That's actually fiber, conduit, effectively things that aren't machines. So no electronics or optical gear. That from a tax perspective takes on a different view. Those might be better served, they would be better served by things like capital leases or somebody paying cash for them. But for the all the passive costs and the materials, and typically the fiber and the conduit in any broadband implementation, to dark fiber now, is about 30% of the cost, and the balance is labor, soft cost, hard, engineering, design, and all these other components. So we're able to capture those and extrude those out over the term, 40 years or whatever it happens to be. So when we talk to municipalities about how to fund projects, one of the first things we do is we try to help net down what available cash sources are there today in their backyard that they can take advantage of. So one of the things we do, and Tim referred to it very early on, is from a ground lease perspective, we acquire and aggregate ground leases. So for our purposes, this conversation, what we would do is provide an upfront cash payment for things like cell tower leases. Typically, every city or county's got some amount of cell tower equipment sitting in on transmission towers or in bell towers, on water tanks, on a whole assortment of things, public buildings. Those all create a lease stream that the AT&T or T-Mobile or somebody's paying out monthly. We would do a net present value calculation on those, pay out the city in cash, and then that money can be used for any project, frankly. That's a cash payment. We then take over a leasehold position and take over the leases. It applies to things like digital advertising leases. I'm working with several cities up in Northern California that are looking to take themselves out of leases that they've got established with advertisers on digital boards that sit on freeways, which create some very interesting revenue streams. Frankly, they're a great way to use digital advertising from a municipal perspective to create revenue. And we'll pay those out for two specific projects that the city, these two cities are looking to enable. And then other existing infrastructure lease streams. One of the things that might be out there potentially, and there's more than these three, are existing leases that might be sitting on previously introduced fiber, from a local carrier or a long-haul carrier. There'll be variations on this. But if a city has fiber in place and they're leasing a portion of it out, we can pay out those leases in order to bring cash to bear for the city to go continue additional other bills, smart city events or things of that nature. Second option is capitalizing existing infrastructure assets. So things that are already in place. Effectively, what we're talking about here is a sale leaseback, and then we go into the same mode long term, the ability to lease back an asset and then take and recover that asset at the end of the term. So I'm going to take you through a short, very quick model, frankly, high level of how we can organize and aggregate these three tools in a pretty simple model, frankly, but to give you a flavor for how all three can be combined in cooperation with things that the city can bring to bear in order to bring a project to the table. You'll notice, too, before I exit this slide, that broadband, water transport, power transmission, our business really focuses on real property assets. So things that are long-lived, effectively are not intended to be replaced, and they might be updated over time, but they're not short-lived. They're usually attached to the ground, or they have a real property aspect to them, like the things I've mentioned here. Again, there are others in the ability to put a value on those, to capitalize them, and do a sale leaseback to provide money to the public entity is the intent of that capitalization effort. So I'll go on to the next slide. Other potential benefits that we're talking to cities about when they think about building broadband, Brian touched on some of these, and I'm not purporting that it's what should be done, but there's some logical value to some of this, and these are variations on things that cities are looking at to either deploy or in the process of deploying with the broadband infrastructure that they're thinking of building, or again, in the process of building. So dark fiber leasing, vertical asset node smart poles. There's going to be a 10-fold increase in vertical real estate. Certainly counties and cities have a very powerful tool and right-of-way, and the ability to put up poles and to manage those with tenants on the top, whether it's a DAS provider, small cell, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever it is, those are going to be revenue opportunities for somebody. And the need to have them fiber connected is effectively essential. And of course, from that flows other technologies, Wi-Fi, LTE, 5G, smart controls, parking, traffic control, digital kiosks, those are all topics in and of themselves. In addition to smart lighting, we're fiber-enabled smart controllable lighting. There's immediate cost savings in these. There's a lot to be said about money that can be saved, frankly, in any of those technologies. But most, if not all, are going to require broadband, as does CCTV or the kind of camera technology that is, kind of on the around the turn in terms of deployment. So when you're thinking about doing any of these things, what you see in red are the things that should be considered. Should cause pause to make sure that folks understand whether they're saving money, how they're saving money, and they clearly understand that money's being saved as a result of integrating broadband. And then, is the entity in a position to operate and maintain? Do you want to operate and maintain? And how do you integrate third-party supports? The ability to market and sell too, because a build it and they will come model is short-sighted. There's plenty of stories out there of fiber in the ground that's fiber in the ground with no plans for its use because there's nobody promoting it or ensuring that people are aware that it's for sale. So these kind of revenue-generating opportunities are great if there's a model or plan and financial success is understood or is defined, I should say. And of course, lit versus dark, two very different conditions, and in some cases, provisioning only of conduit may be a better way to go, depending on what the goals are, and for the city internally, and anything external to the city or the county that they may be thinking about in terms of revenue generation. So quick model. I think there's only 2 more slides here. So in this very simple model, this California municipality is interested in creating a dark fiber strategy. So what I'll take you through quickly here is how this can get paid for using our model, elements of it, and what the outcome can look like. So in this particular very simple model, initial phase 1 in-city build was done for $4.5 million. Phase 2 was planned at $15.5. So the intent here was to go and issue bonds to the tune of $8 million, but that's not going to get them to the entire 15.5. So where do we find the balance of capital to provide to this? So carrier equipment that is located today in the city is creating lease streams of $144,000 per year. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how we then monetize those existing lease streams, which we'll talk about here. So first things first, we're capitalizing. You'll remember there's a $4.5 million build in phase 1 year in 2015. So that was then capitalized at $3.75 million over a 25-year period. So we delivered $3.75 to the city and in exchange for a lease, a monthly lease, 25-year lease. Then monetize the existing carrier leases to the tune of $800,000, and it was 2 of the 4 leases. There were more than 4. The city wasn't interested in exiting all of them, and that delivered $800,000. Finally, in step 3, we provided straight development funding over a 25-year term of $2.95 with a triple net lease, which equates to a $23,000 per month lease payment. So you'll see here the original $7.5 million that was necessary, reduced by the $3.75 for the capitalization of the initial phase 1 in the ground fiber, left $3.75. $800,000 was then exited from that number as a result of the monetization of 2 sets of carrier leases that we bought and capitalized, monetized for the city, providing $800,000 in cash, and the $2.95 was then provided in development funding in exchange for a lease over a 25-year period. So that's very quick, and if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Perfect, Steve. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. You too, Brian. Steve, certainly Landmark is not alone in being in the marketplace for a providing the capital and liquidity for communities, cities to start to unlock their assets in order to bring broadband to their communities. Is that correct?
That's correct. I will say this: we have not yet encountered anybody doing what we're doing from an operating lease perspective. There's certainly banks of all sizes out there that are providing loans for infrastructure. There's even some construction loan opportunities out there, which I've seen as of late. And then there are entities like Macquarie, which takes a much more involved interest in the development, the operation of the network. And typically, at least in my experience, those have been much bigger projects. But there's a wide variation, but none that we've seen that are providing operating leases and providing capital via operating leases like our model.
Okay, Brian, back to you. You've been a partner in Kentucky Wired, so if we're talking about rural communities in California, which have a lot in common, I think, in Kentucky, having underserved areas and with topologies and geographies that make it difficult to bring fiber everywhere, what would be a good takeaway for cities or communities in California to learn? If there's one takeaway to learn from Kentucky, what would it be? Would it be the middle mile kind of project that leads to community broadband? Would it be state involvement? Would it be a company like Macquarie and yourselves who essentially tie all the pieces together?
Yeah, I think it's tying all the pieces together to begin with. So having a cogent plan, you just can't get around that. But here's what I think would be more practical advice. I mean, put everything on the table. Put all the pieces and parts on the table, and bring in the right help to help you assemble the puzzle based on what you're saying your goals are, and having somebody assess what the current state is, and showing how those pieces fit together. And to drill down on that more specifically, as an example, you have schools throughout your county that are getting inadequate or insufficient broadband service today, most likely. And so that sort of begs the question of how do you have that piece on the table and use that as a central point to build a solution around. Well, the great news is that the federal government has made some very significant changes to the E-rate program, the federal subsidy program that funds our school and library connectivity, which is now providing just for now, an uncapped amount of funding for constructing fiber networks to serve schools and libraries. So if you plot your schools and libraries throughout your county, you have a potential funding source to construct a fiber network to connect all those facilities, and then that provides a decent footprint in a lot of cases that gets fiber out to areas that otherwise aren't served by fiber. And then you can plot around those schools. You plot your water towers and water tanks, your weather siren towers, and your lookout towers, and so forth. And then you can see, well, here's how I can run laterals to connect those areas. So anyway, it's that kind of approach that becomes very practical for getting this infrastructure out in a way that has to be county-led.
Unless there are any other questions, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you to the attendees for joining us for today's webinar, and thank you to the presenters for sharing their expertise with us today. We will make the presentations available on our website at www.counties.org. And one more time, thank you to Tim at Smart Gig Media, as well as to Brian and Steve for sharing their time with us today.